What if a town never truly died? It just learned how to watch in silence. Hidden deep in the mountains of Montana, far from highways, cities, and casual travelers, there is a place that officially no longer exists, yet refuses to rest. Garnet is labeled a ghost town, abandoned, preserved, harmless, but those who have stood among its decaying buildings often describe a different reality, a reality where silence feels crowded, where the air seems heavy with memory, and where the past does not stay buried. From the very first step onto its dirt paths, something feels wrong, as if the town itself is aware of your presence. At first glance, Garnet looks like many forgotten mining settlements of the American West. Weathered wooden structures, collapsing roofs, empty windows staring into nothing. But linger for more than a few minutes, and the illusion breaks. Visitors report hearing footsteps. When no one is there, doors that creak open without wind, voices carried through the trees when the forest is completely still. These are not rare or isolated stories. They are consistent, repeated by hikers, historians, park rangers, and paranormal investigators who had no intention of believing in anything unusual before arriving. The unsettling part is not just what people claim to experience, but where it happens. Sounds often come from specific buildings, especially the old hotel, the saloon, and the cabins where miners once slept. Places where arguments turned violent, where alcohol flowed freely, where desperation and greed lived side by side. Even skeptics admit that Garnet feels different from other abandoned towns. There is a sense of interruption, as if life stopped suddenly but never fully left. Garnet sits at over 6,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by dense forest and harsh terrain. Winters here are brutal, isolating the area completely for months. Snow buries the roads, cutting off access and trapping whatever remains behind. During those long winters, the town stands alone, frozen in chimney. Some rangers have admitted they avoid night patrols in the area unless absolutely necessary, not because of animals, not because of weather, but because of what they cannot explain. Radios malfunction, batteries drain unusually fast, and the feeling of being watched becomes overwhelming once the sun goes down. What makes Garnet especially disturbing is that it was never officially abandoned all at once. There was no single disaster that wiped it off the map overnight. Instead, it faded in stages, slowly losing people, businesses, and purpose. And yet, many personal belongings were left behind. Furniture remains inside cabins, bottles still line shelves. Tools rest where hands once dropped them. This creates the impression that people left in a hurry or that they never intended to leave forever, almost as if they were forced out or driven away by something unseen. Historical records tell one story. Personal accounts tell another. According to official documents, Garnet declined due to fires, harsh winters, and economic collapse. But these explanations fail to address why so many residents reported fear long before the town emptied. Old letters mention paranoia, sleepless nights, and an unshakable sense of dread. Some miners wrote about hearing voices in the woods. Others spoke of shadows moving between buildings at night. These accounts were dismissed at the time as stress, alcohol, or isolation. Yet the same descriptions continue to surface more than a century later. Even during the day, Garnet feels suspended between moments. Sounds are muffled. The forest seems unnaturally quiet. Wind moves through broken windows like breath. When clouds roll in, visibility drops suddenly, and the town appears to close in on itself. Many visitors report losing track of time, staying far longer than intended without realizing it. Others describe an intense urge to leave immediately, overcome by anxiety for no clear reason. The most chilling detail is that Garnet does not feel empty. It feels occupied, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but subtly, persistently, as if something is still going about its routine, repeating fragments of a life that ended violently and without closure. This is what separates Garnet from other ghost towns. It does not present itself as a relic. It behaves like a place that remembers, and that raises an unsettling question. If Garnet is truly abandoned, why does it feel like it is still waiting for something or someone? Before we can understand what may still linger here, we need to understand how this town was born, who came here, and what kind of lives were built in such an unforgiving place. Because the origins of Garnet hold the first clues to why it refuses to stay silent. If this story already made you feel uneasy, imagine what comes next. Garnet is not just another abandoned town, and what you have heard so far is only the surface of a much darker history. Before we go deeper, take a moment to engage with this investigation. Leave a comment sharing what you felt while listening to this part. Did Garnet sound like a place marked by tragedy, or like something that never truly let go of the living? Understanding stories like this depends on attention, curiosity, and perspective. When you comment, you are not just reacting. You are helping uncover layers of meaning that often go unnoticed. If this kind of deep, unsettling exploration matters to you, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what is coming next. Garnet did not begin as a town meant to last. It was born from urgency, greed, and desperation, the same forces that carved hundreds of temporary settlements across the American West in the late 19th century. In 1895, prospectors discovered gold in a narrow, remote valley of western Montana, a place so isolated that even seasoned frontiersmen hesitated before settling there. Within months, word spread, not through newspapers, but through whispers carried by miners moving from one strike to the next. And just like that, Garnet came alive. Men arrived on foot, on horseback, and by crude wagons that struggled through forests and steep mountain passes. There were no roads, no rail connections, no infrastructure waiting for them. Everything had to be built from scratch, often with limited tools and fewer supplies. Cabins rose quickly, nailed together with raw timber cut from nearby forests. Saloons followed almost immediately, then boarding houses, supply stores, and makeshift hotels. Garnet grew not because it was safe or practical, but because gold erased fear. By the late 1890s, Garnet had transformed into one of Montana's most productive gold camps. At its peak, the town supported several thousand residents, most of them men. They lived hard lives defined by physical exhaustion, constant competition, and the relentless hope that the next dig would be the one that changed everything. Gold. Mining in Garnet was not romantic. It was brutal. Underground shafts collapsed without warning. Dynamite misfires killed or maimed workers. Accidents were common, and medical care was almost non-existent. What made Garnet especially volatile was its isolation. Supplies were expensive and irregular. Winters could trap residents for months, cutting them off from the outside world entirely. Food shortages were not unusual. Alcohol became a coping mechanism, and with it came violence. Disputes over claims often turned physical. theft was common, and when someone died, whether from an accident or a knife fight, the town simply absorbed it and moved on. The population boom happened too fast for any sense of order to form. Law enforcement existed in name only. A sheriff might pass through occasionally, but Garnet largely governed itself, and that kind of self-rule in a gold camp almost always meant chaos. Gambling halls operated day and night. Saloons stayed open until men collapsed. Where they stood, tempers flared easily in a place where everyone was tired, cold, and afraid of failure. Historical records describe Garnet as prosperous, but they rarely captured the psychological strain of living there. Many miners were alone, far from families they might never see again. Letters sent east speak of crushing loneliness and constant anxiety. The promise of wealth kept them digging, but the reality was that very few struck it rich. Most barely earned enough to survive. Death, imbalance between expectation and reality created resentment, paranoia, and a deep sense of unease that settled over the town. The geography amplified everything. Garnet sat high in the mountains, surrounded by thick forests that blocked sightlines and muffled sound. At night, darkness fell completely. There were no city lights, no distant glow on the horizon, only lanterns flickering in the wind and the sounds of the forest closing in. Many miners reported feeling watched when traveling between buildings after dark. Others refused to walk alone at night, even during the town's busiest years. As Garnet grew, so did its reputation. Some saw it as a place of opportunity. Others whispered that it was cursed. Murders went unsolved. People vanished without explanation. A miner might leave for the woods and never return, and no one would search very long. There were always more men arriving, ready to take the place of those who disappeared. Life was cheap in a town built entirely on extraction. This foundation matters because Garnet was never stable. It was constructed on transience, on the idea that everyone was passing through. Very few planned to stay once the gold was gone. That mindset shaped everything. Buildings were not meant to last. Relationships were shallow. Community bonds were weak. And when a place is built without roots, it becomes vulnerable to something far darker than economic collapse. The energy of Garnet was frantic, restless, and tense. From the beginning, people lived as if tomorrow did not matter, because for many of them, it truly did not. And when you combine isolation, violence, exhaustion, and unfulfilled hope, you create the perfect conditions for a town to fracture from the inside. Long before Garnet was abandoned, something was already breaking beneath the surface. Some visitors today claim they can still feel that unrest, as if the ground itself remembers the panic and desperation of those early years. To understand why Garnet did not simply fade like other mining towns, we need to look at what happened when that desperation finally boiled over into bloodshed, crime, and death. Garnet's true darkness did not come from abandoned buildings or ghost stories told decades later. It was forged while the town was still alive, loud, and crowded. Beneath the clatter of tools and the laughter spilling out of saloons, violence was a constant presence, woven into daily life so tightly that it became almost invisible. Place where law was distant and survival depended on luck, fear quietly shaped every interaction. Gold camps attracted men who had little to lose. Some were former soldiers hardened by war. Others were fugitives drifting west to disappear. Many were simply desperate, chasing one last chance after failure elsewhere. Garnet became a pressure cooker of competing claims, bruised egos, and unspoken grudges. Arguments over mining rights were not theoretical. They were personal, emotional, and often settled with fists, knives, or bullets. Historical records confirm multiple homicides in and around Garnet during its peak years, but the true number is almost certainly higher. Deaths were poorly documented. In some cases, bodies were buried quickly without investigation. In others, men vanished and were never formally recorded as dead. The mountains made hiding evidence easy. A shallow grave, a body lost to wildlife, or a fall into a remote ravine could erase a person completely. One of the most infamous incidents involved a robbery and murder that shocked even a town accustomed to violence. A respected miner was found dead under suspicious circumstances, his gold missing. No one was ever convicted. Witnesses contradicted each other. Some refused to speak at all. The case faded from attention as new arrivals flooded the town, replacing faces but not resolving the crime. Justice in Garnet was inconsistent and often non-existent. Alcohol intensified everything. Saloons were the heart of social life, but they were also breeding grounds for aggressions. Long days underground ended in nights of heavy drinking. Tempers flared easily. Fights broke out over card games, insults, and imagined slights. Knives and revolvers were common, and escalation was fast. A disagreement that might end in words elsewhere could turn fatal in minutes. Women were few in Garnet, and their presence added another layer of tension. Jealousy, competition, and possessiveness fueled conflicts that rarely ended cleanly. Some women ran boarding houses or worked in saloons. Others lived in quieter circumstances, but all existed within a male-dominated environment where protection was uncertain. There are accounts of abuse, disappearances, and rumors that were never officially investigated. The most disturbing aspect is how normal this became. Violence was expected. Death was absorbed into the routine of mining life. When someone did not show up for work, speculation replaced concern. Maybe he left town. Maybe he struck gold elsewhere. Maybe he died. In Garnet, those possibilities carried equal weight, and none demanded closure. This atmosphere created a collective numbness. People stopped asking questions because answers were dangerous. Speaking too much could make you a target. Silence became a survival strategy, and when silence dominates a community, secrets multiply. Crimes remain unresolved, not because no one knows the truth, but because too many people do. Modern research studying Garnet's past often encounter gaps in records that feel intentional. Names appear briefly, then vanish. Dates contradict each other. Testimonies conflict in ways that suggest fear rather than confusion. It is as if parts of Garnet's history were deliberately erased, not by time, but by those who lived through it and chose not to remember openly. Visitors today often report feeling sudden anxiety near the old saloon and certain cabins, even without knowing their histories. So many flashes of emotion that feel foreign. Anger, fear, panic, grief. Psychologists might attribute this to suggestion or imagination, but the consistency of these reactions raises questions. Can places absorb trauma? Can repeated acts of violence leave an imprint that lingers long after the people are gone? Garnet's crimes were never fully explained because the town itself never demanded explanations. It moved forward by forgetting, layering new days over unresolved nights. But unresolved violence does not disappear. It settles, it waits, and in places like Garnet, it becomes part of the atmosphere, shaping how the town is experienced long after the last resident leaves. To understand why Garnet feels so oppressive even now, we have to look beyond individual crimes and examine the environment that allowed them to flourish. The isolation, the cold, the feeling of being cut off from the world all played a role in pushing people toward the edge. What truly set Garnet apart was not just violence or greed, but how completely it was cut off from everything else. This was not a town on the edge of civilization. It was a town swallowed by wilderness. Garnet sat deep in the mountains, surrounded by dense forests and steep terrain that made travel slow, exhausting, and often dangerous. Reaching it required days of effort, and leaving was never simple. Once winter arrived, isolation became absolute. Snowfall here was not a mild inconvenience. It was a wild. Roads disappeared under ice and drifts. Supply routes closed. Messages stopped arriving. For months at a time, Garnet existed in a sealed bubble where the outside world might as well not exist. News traveled slowly, if at all. If something went wrong, there was no quick help coming. Illness, injury, or conflict had to be handled internally, no matter how severe. This level of isolation has profound psychological effects. Humans are not meant to live without reference points, without reassurance that help is nearby or that escape is possible. In Garnet, the mountains created a sense of containment. The forest pressed inward. The sky felt lower in winter, heavy with clouds and snow. Nights were long, dark, and silent in a way that unsettles even experienced outdoorsmen. Miners wrote about losing track of days. Without regular schedules or contact with the outside world, time blurred. Weeks felt endless. Some reported sleeping excessively. Others could not sleep at all. Cabin walls creaked under the weight of snow and cold. Wind howled through the trees like voices carried just out of reach. When lanterns went out, darkness was total. There was nothing to soften it. Paranoia thrives in environments like this. Small disagreements feel larger when there is nowhere to escape them. A hostile glance lingers longer. A rumor spreads faster. People begin to assume the worst intentions in others because trust feels dangerous. In Garnet, this meant neighbors became threats and silence became protection. The isolation also amplified fear of the unknown. The forest around Garnet was vast and largely unexplored. At night, sounds carried in strange ways. Branches snapped, animals moved unseen, but Overchimmy residents began to describe things that did not fit natural explanations. Footsteps circling cabins, whispers outside walls, shapes moving between trees where no one should be in a crowded city. These experiences might be dismissed immediately. In Garnet, alone and trapped, they felt real. Even during the day, the sense of being cut off never faded. The nearest towns were far away, reachable only by difficult routes. Mail arrived sporadically. Supplies were precious. If someone decided to leave, they might not be seen again, not because they died, but because distance erased them. This made disappearances feel normal, yet deeply unsettling. People vanished, and life went on, but the absence lingered. Isolation also eroded accountability. In places where no one is watching, behavior changes. Rules become flexible, morality becomes situational. In Garnet, there was no larger society to answer to. What happened there often stayed there. This allowed violence, theft, and exploitation to persist without consequence. And over Chimi, that environment shapes the collective mindset of everyone living inside it. Modern visitors often underestimate this factor. They see a quiet, preserved ghost town and assume it was always peaceful. But when you stand there long enough, surrounded by forest and silence, the pressure becomes noticeable. Cell signals fade. Sounds dull. The world feels distant. Many report an urge to leave quickly, as if their instincts are warning them that staying too long is a mistake. Isolation does not just separate people from society, it separates them from themselves. Thoughts loopy, fears grow louder, and when a place holds thousands of those moments layered over decades, it begins to feel heavy, charged with unresolved tension. This isolation was not just a background condition. It was an active force shaping Garnet's fate, and when disaster finally struck, there was no outside support to soften the blow or slow the collapse. The next turning point would push the town past recovery and begin the process of abandonment. The moment that changed Garnet forever did not arrive with a scream or a sudden evacuation. It arrived quietly, carried on smoke and disbelief. Fire was always a threat in mining towns, but in Garnet it was especially dangerous. Buildings were made almost entirely of dry timber. Chimneys ran hot day and night. Lanterns, candles, and wood stoves were everywhere. One mistake was enough, and when that mistake finally happened, the town was not prepared. Late one night, flames erupted in the heart of Garnet. Accounts differ on the exact cause, which only adds to the unease. Some records suggest a stove was left unattended. Others mention a drunken accident. There are even whispers of deliberate arson tied to personal grudges. What is certain is that the fire spread fast. Wind funneled through the narrow valley, feeding the flames as they leapt from building to building. There was no organized fire brigade. Buckets were passed hand to hand in desperation, but water sources were limited and distant. Men fought the blaze with whatever they could grab: shovels, wet blankets, bare hands. The heat was overwhelming. Sparks rained down on nearby rooftops, igniting new fires faster than they could be extinguished. Panic took hold. By the time the fire died, Garnet was permanently wounded. Key structures were gone. Businesses that anchored daily life were reduced to ash. Livelihoods vanished overnight. For a town already strained by isolation, violence, and declining gold yields, the fire was not just destruction. It was a psychological breaking point. Survivors described the aftermath as eerie. Smoke lingered for days. Charred foundations sat where buildings once stood, still warm to the touch. Personal items were uncovered in the debris: warped tools, melted bottles, fragments of furniture. People walked through the ruins in silence, realizing that something fundamental had shifted. Garnet no longer felt temporary. It felt doomed. Rebuilding was discussed, but enthusiasm was gone. The gold was becoming harder to reach. Costs were rising. Winters felt harsher. The fire had stripped away the illusion that Garnet could endure anything. Some residents left almost immediately, packing what little they owned and disappearing into the mountains. Others stayed, clinging to habit more than hope. What made the fire especially devastating was its timing. It did not happen during Garnet's peak, when money and manpower were abundant. It struck when morale was already low, when belief in the future was fragile. In that sense, the fire did not destroy Garnet. It revealed how close to collapse it already was. After the fire, nights grew quieter. Saloons closed earlier. Streets emptied faster. The energy that once drove the town forward evaporated. People stopped repairing buildings. Temporary fixes replaced long-term plans. The mindset shifted from growth to survival. Many later visitors describe certain burned areas as particularly unsettling. Even now, they feel colder, quieter. Some claim the air smells faintly of smoke on days when there is no fire anywhere nearby. Others report sudden images flashing in their minds. Flames, shouting, running figures. Whether memory or imagination, the fire left a scar that never fully healed. This was the moment Garnet crossed the line, from a struggling town into a place waiting to be abandoned. What followed was not a single departure, but a slow, collective retreat. And the way people left tells its own disturbing story. Garnet did not die with a final farewell. It emptied quietly, almost politely, as if the town itself did not want to draw attention to its collapse. After the fire, departures accelerated, but they were not dramatic caravans heading out together. People left in fragments, one family at a time, one miner deciding not to return from a supply run, one business closing its doors and never reopening. The town thinned slowly, unevenly, and without ceremony. What makes Garnet's abandonment so unsettling is how incomplete it feels. Homes were not stripped bare. Furniture remained where it stood. Beds were left made. Bottles still lined shelves behind saloon bars. Tools lay rusting on tables, as if their owners had simply stepped outside and never came back. This was not abandonment driven by opportunity elsewhere. It was retreat driven by exhaustion and fear. Some residents left believing they would return when conditions improved. Winter made travel impossible. So many departures happened in late summer and early fall, with the promise of coming back in spring. But spring came, and fewer returned each year. The town slipped out of habit, then out of memory. Garnet became a place people talked about in the past tense before they realized it. Others left suddenly, without explanation. Records show people selling claims at steep losses, or simply walking away from them. In a gold town that was unthinkable unless hope was truly gone. Letters from the period mention a feeling of relief after leaving, as if a weight had been lifted. That detail appears. Again and again, relief. Not sadness, not nostalgia, relief, as if Garnet had been something endured rather than lived. The remaining population grew increasingly isolated from itself. Empty buildings created gaps in the town's rhythm. Fewer lights burned at night. Fewer voices carried through the valley. Silence expanded, filling spaces once crowded with life. Those who stayed often moved closer together for comfort, abandoning outer cabins and peripheral buildings first. This created pockets of emptiness that felt unsafe, even in daylight. By the time Garnet was effectively abandoned, there was no single moment that marked the end, no announcement, no closing day. The town simply crossed the threshold where leaving felt easier than staying. And when that threshold was crossed, Garnet did not resist. It allowed itself to be left behind. What remains disturbing is how little documentation exists about the final residents. Names vanish from records. Addresses stop updating. Some individuals appear in census data one year and nowhere the next. Whether they moved on, died, or disappeared is often unclear. The town lost not just people, but continuity. Modern visitors often describe an overwhelming sense. that Garnet was left unfinished, not just physically, but emotionally, as if conversations were interrupted mid-sentence, as if lives were paused rather than concluded. That sensation may explain why the town feels so present despite being empty. It was not closed. It was abandoned in motion. This kind of abandonment leaves a different kind of imprint. When places are destroyed, the story ends. When they are abandoned, the story lingers. Garnet became a container for unfinished lives, unresolved choices, and unanswered questions. And that lingering quality is exactly what draws people back today. Not just historians or tourists, but those searching for something harder to define. Because when a town empties this way, it does not become empty. It becomes something else entirely. Long after the last residents of Garnet were gone, the town refused to fade into silence. In fact, the strangest chapter of its story did not begin until decades later, when hikers, historians, and park officials started reporting experiences that did not fit any rational explanation. These were not stories passed down through folklore. They were first-hand accounts from people who arrived expecting nothing more than a quiet walk through a preserved ghost town. One of the most common reports involves sound. Visitors describe hearing footsteps on wooden floors inside buildings that are clearly empty. The steps are not random creaks caused by aging timber. They are rhythmic, paced, deliberate. Some say the sound follows them from room to room. Others report hearing boots crunching on gravel outside, only to find no one there when they step out. Voices are another recurring element. Low murmurs, brief words, sometimes laughter, often carried on still air when there is no wind. Rangers who have spent nights near Garnet admit that radios occasionally pick up faint voices or static bursts that do not correspond to any known signal. Batteries drain unusually fast, even in new equipment. Flashlights flicker or shut off entirely near certain buildings, most notably the old hotel and the saloon. Visual encounters are rarer but more disturbing. Several visitors have reported seeing figures standing in windows or doorways, only to vanish when approached. These figures are not described as transparent or ghost-like in a dramatic sense. Instead, they appear solid, human, and out of place, dressed in clothing that does not belong to the present. A man leaning against a wall, a woman standing near a staircase, someone sitting quietly, watching. What makes these sightings unsettling is their consistency. People who have never spoken to each other describe similar locations, similar figures, and similar emotions. Fear is not always the first reaction. Many report confusion, followed by a deep sense of unease, as if they have intruded on something private. Some leave immediately. Others stay, compelled by curiosity, only to feel increasingly overwhelmed. Night amplifies everything. After sunset, Garnet changes. Shadows stretch unnaturally across buildings. The forest seems closer, pressing in. Sounds travel farther, but direction becomes impossible to determine. Footsteps might echo from behind, then from above. Doors move without wind. In some cases, visitors describe the feeling of being guided, led towards certain buildings, without consciously deciding to go there. Skeptics often attribute these experiences to suggestion, imagination, or environmental factors. But even those explanations struggle to account for the emotional intensity reported. People speak of sudden sadness, anger, or panic with no clear cause. These emotions fade once they leave Garnet's boundaries, as if the town itself triggered them. Park officials rarely promote these stories, but many quietly acknowledge them. Some avoid staying after dark. Others follow strict routines to minimize time spent alone. It is not fear of danger in a physical sense, but discomfort, the feeling of being observed, evaluated, or remembered. What makes Garnet different from other haunted locations is the absence of theatrics. There are no grand manifestations, no dramatic hauntings staged for tourists. The experiences are subtle, personal, and deeply unsettling. Garnet does not try to scare, it simply exists, and in doing so, it reminds visitors that not everything leaves when people do. This raises a difficult question. Are these experiences echoes of unresolved lives, or are they reflections of how human trauma imprints itself on a place? To answer that, we need to understand how environments shaped by suffering affect the human mind. There is a reason certain places feel heavier than others, even when nothing appears visibly wrong. Psychologists and researchers who study human perception have long noted that environments shaped by intense stress, fear, and repeated trauma can provoke powerful reactions in those who enter them later. Garnet is a textbook example of this phenomenon, not because it is haunted in the traditional sense, but because it is saturated with unresolved human experience. When people live for long periods under extreme pressure, isolation, violence, uncertainty, and constant threat, their emotional states become part of the daily rhythm of a place. Fear is repeated, anger becomes normal, desperation is shared. Over time, these emotions stop being individual and start becoming collective. Garnet was not shaped by a single tragedy, but by hundreds of smaller ones layered year after year. Injuries, deaths, betrayals, abandonment, loss without closure. Modern neuroscience shows that humans are highly sensitive to environmental cues, often without conscious awareness. Subtle changes in sound, light, temperature, and spatial layout can trigger emotional responses linked to survival instincts. In Garnet, narrow paths, enclosed buildings, low visibility, and dense forest activates the same areas of the brain associated with threat detection. The body reacts before the mind has time to rationalize. This explains why many visitors report anxieties or sadness without knowing the town's history. Their nervous systems are responding to an environment that signals danger, confinement, and unpredictability. Silence here does not feel peaceful. It feels expectant. Stillness feels loaded, not calm. The brain searches for explanation, and when it cannot find one, fills the gap with unease. Another factor is narrative contamination. Even without hearing specific ghost stories, people instinctively recognize when a place was not left gently. Garnet's abandonment was incomplete. Objects remain where they were last used. Spaces look paused, not finished. This creates cognitive dissonance. The brain expects absence, but perceives presence. That conflict is deeply uncomfortable. Trauma specialists also speak of emotional resonance. When people enter places tied to suffering, their own emotional memories can be activated. Feelings that do not belong to the moment surface unexpectedly. This can feel external, as if the place itself is projecting emotion. In Garnet, visitors often describe emotions that do not match their personal state before arrival. Fear without cause, grief without loss, anger without target. Importantly, these reactions are remarkably consistent. Different people, different backgrounds, similar descriptions. That consistency suggests something more than imagination at work. Whether one believes in paranormal explanations or not, the psychological impact is real. Garnet changes how people feel, how they think, and how long they want to stay. Some researchers argue that places like Garnet function as emotional mirrors. They reflect unresolved human experience back onto the observer. Others believe that repeated trauma can condition an environment in ways science has not fully explained yet. What matters is not which explanation is correct, but that the effect is undeniable. This psychological weight helps explain why Garnet stands out among hundreds of abandoned towns. It does not feel empty, it feels interrupted, as if something was meant to end but never did. And when people sense that, their minds search for meaning, often interpreting that discomfort as presence. Understanding this does not make Garnet less unsettling. In some ways, it makes it more disturbing. Because if the town is not haunted by spirits, then it is haunted by something harder to escape: human suffering, frozen in place, waiting for anyone willing to step into it. To understand why Garnet is remembered as one of the most haunted ghost towns in America, we now need to compare it to other abandoned places and see what truly makes it different. Across the United States, there are hundreds of abandoned towns, mining camps, railroad stops, failed settlements, slowly by nature. Many are quiet, some are eerie, a few are unsettling. But Garnet occupies a different category entirely, and understanding why requires comparison, not imagination. When researchers, historians, and experienced explorers visit multiple ghost towns, they often describe Garnet as uniquely oppressive, not because of one dramatic event, but because of how many dark elements converged in one place. Most ghost towns died quickly. A mine ran dry. A railroad bypassed them. Picked up, and left almost overnight. Those places feel empty because their stories ended abruptly and cleanly. Garnet did not end that way. It decayed slowly. Violence overlapped with isolation. Hope faded, gradually fear lingered. That slow collapse allowed tension to accumulate rather than release. Another key difference is preservation. Garnet was never completely dismantled or scavenged the way many ghost towns were. Buildings remained standing. Interiors were left intact. This created a rare situation where physical space still mirrors emotional space. When people walk through Garnet today, they are not imagining the past. They are standing inside its remains. That proximity intensifies every reaction. Location also plays a crucial role. Many ghost towns sit in open desert, where visibility is wide and escape feels possible. Garnet is enclosed, forested, shadowed. The surrounding wilderness limits sight lines and sound, making orientation difficult. Even experienced hikers report feeling disoriented after only a short time. This environmental pressure amplifies fear responses and makes Garnet feel inescapable, even though it is physically accessible. Then there is the consistency of modern reports. Other ghost towns have stories. Garnet has patterns, similar sounds, similar locations, similar emotions described by people who arrive without prior knowledge. This consistency is rare. It suggests that whatever affects visitors is not random, but tied to specific features of the town itself. Garnet also lacks commercial distortion. There are no staged, no actors, no exaggerated legends designed to attract tourists. In fact, the town is often promoted as a historical site, not a paranormal one. And yet, the stories persist, passed quietly between visitors, rangers, and locals. That absence of performance makes the experiences feel more credible, more personal, and more disturbing. Finally, Garnet feels unfinished. Other ghost towns feel abandoned. Garnet feels interrupted. Its structures, still hold intention. Its rooms still feel occupied by purpose, even if no one is there. That sense of interrupted life is deeply unsettling to the human mind. We expect decay to erase intention. In Garnet, it has not. This combination, slow collapse, preserved space, environmental enclosure, consistent reports, and emotional interruption, is what elevates Garnet beyond history and into something more troubling. It becomes not just a ghost town, but a psychological threshold, a place where the past presses too close to the present. And that leads to the most uncomfortable question of all. If Garnet affects people this strongly more than a century later, what else about its past has never been fully uncovered? What details were never recorded, never spoken, never resolved? To reach that question, we have to confront the final layer of Garnet's mystery, the secrets that may still be hidden in plain sight. Even after more than a century, Garnet refuses to settle into the past. Its buildings stand frozen, its objects remain where human hands last placed them, and its silence feels deliberate rather than accidental. What makes this final layer of Garnet's story so unsettling is not what we know, but what is missing. The gaps, the silences, the details that were never written down or were quietly erased. Historical records from Garnet are fragmented. Names appear briefly, then vanish. Incidents are mentioned without resolution. Deaths are recorded without context. Disputes are hinted at, but never explained. This is not unusual for frontier towns, but in Garnet the omissions feel systematic, as if certain truths were intentionally left undocumented, either out of fear, shame, or survival. There are no complete lists of the final residents, no clear timeline marking when the last families left, no detailed accounts explaining why so many belongings were abandoned instead of sold or taken. These absences matter. They suggest that Garnet did not simply fail economically. Something else accelerated its collapse, something people did not want to fully confront. Some researchers believe that undiscovered burial sites still exist in the surrounding forest. Others suspect crimes were committed that never reached official notice. In an isolated town with minimal oversight, it would not have been difficult to hide wrongdoing. A disappearance could be explained away as relocation. A death could be attributed to accident. Over time, these explanations become history, even if they were never true. What is especially disturbing is how Garnet seems to resist complete understanding. Every attempt to fully explain it leaves something unresolved. Rational explanations account for parts of the experience, but not all of it. Psychological theories explain reactions, but not consistency. Environmental factors explain discomfort, but not presence. Each layer explains something, but none explain everything. Visitors often report the same final sensation before leaving, a feeling that they have seen only part of the story, that something remains just out of reach, that Garnet is holding on to information it does not want to release easily. This sensation is not dramatic or frightening. It is quiet, persistent, and deeply unsettling. Perhaps Garnet's true mystery is not about ghosts, but about memory, about what happens when a place outlives the people who shaped it, and the story ends without closure. Garnet may not be haunted by spirits, but by unfinished lives, unresolved violence, and truths that were never spoken aloud. And that may be why Garnet continues to affect people so strongly. Not because it wants attention, but because it was never allowed an ending. It exists in a permanent state of suspension, waiting for understanding that may never come. The question that remains is simple and deeply uncomfortable. If Garnet could speak, what would it tell us about what really happened here? If you stayed until the end of this story, you are someone who looks beyond appearances and searches for what hides beneath silence. Garnet is not just a forgotten town. It is a reminder that some places never fully release the past. Now it is your turn to be part of this investigation. Leave a comment below writing Garnet Remembers and share your own theory about what you believe truly happened there. Was it fear, violence, isolation, or something that history never recorded? If this kind of dark, investigative storytelling matters to you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows these deep explorations into forgotten places and unresolved mysteries to continue. And before you go, watch the next video appearing on your screen right now. Another abandoned place, another story buried by time, and another mystery that refuses to stay quiet.